Hi, and welcome everyone to the first of a series of calls or webinars around becoming a masterful manager. My name's AJ, Alexandria Joy, and it's awesome to have you join me this evening or wherever you're listening to at whatever time. Becoming a masterful manager is something I've been working on and talking to people about for a long time. And it seems that it's become more and more prevalent and more something that we need to start talking about in our organizations around the world. And so that's what brought me to this series of free webinars. Before we get underway too far, I always like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am, and many of you perhaps. So for anyone who's down under, I myself am at the moment on the Awabakal land. You may be on another land somewhere or somewhere else entirely in the world. But I always like to acknowledge the traditional elders, and I do think that elders past, present, and emerging have much to teach us about how we can live better in tribes, how we can work better in our workplaces, the clarity of the roles that they often have in their tribes and their families, and the understanding they have of working with seasons and working with timings in their life. And I think we have much to learn from that. This image is a beautiful painting that I recently purchased from a local Indigenous artist, and it's called Coal in the Cliffs, and it's just stunning. It really reminds me of some of my own bushwalks along the beach. So I wanted to first pay my respects. So welcome. It's great to have you join us. And in a moment, I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you. And just briefly, we'll do that in the chat box. But welcome to this call. And in particular, I want to say thank you for committing some time, an hour. And it will be a series of an hour each week for a number of weeks. And you can come and go into those as you wish. Tonight, we're going to specifically do more of an overview of the topic before we dive in and do more detailed and practical things in future weeks. But I really want to say thank you for committing to yourself, because anyone who's taking the time out of their valuable schedule to watch or to listen to this really, shows your level of commitment to continue to improve. So, who are you and what brings you here? Let's start there. So in the chat box, I'd love you to just pop a little note, and you can just say first name or whatever works for you, but what brings you here? So are you experiencing some challenges with your own manager? Are you a first-time manager? Are you leading a team and you're just always looking for things for how I can do better? Perhaps you're in an environment that's a little toxic and you're wanting to know, how can I improve? So in the chat box, let's all get underway in just popping in a few words about who are you and what brings you here. The chat box is in the little bar where it says chat underneath audience view and attendees. So if you can pop your thoughts in there for a moment. Always wanting to learn more. Thanks, Penny. Self-improvement, pick up some hints. Yeah, handy hints for the workplace. Great. Thanks, Joe. Recently became a leader. That's exciting. Good on you, Kristen. Better service to team and then hope to improve the culture. Great. Which, of course, management leadership is all very, very linked to culture. That's awesome, Lisa. Your team has increased significantly, Liz. Yeah, great. So hoping for some tips. Awesome. And there's probably plenty to learn from the group as well. Wanting to learn how to be the manager I want to be, not the one that was modeled. Yes, right. Sometimes we have experiences of managers and leaders that teach us a lot. They teach us what we don't want to be. Awesome. So let's start to jump in, and feel free to keep commenting and chatting there because we can view that as we go along. So really, why me? So as I said at the beginning, My name's Alexandria Joy, or AJ, and I guess I've been a manager and a leader in many different capacities throughout my career to date, both in public organisations and private organisations, in large teams, in small teams, in teams where I had a lot of control, and in teams where I didn't have a lot of control, depending on the structure, the organisation, the format, the delegation, those sorts of things. And over a number of years, I really started to witness, and I had managers myself who were controlling, who were micromanaging. And I also had the fortune of working for some general managers and leaders who were incredible servant leaders, who encouraged me to do better, who encouraged me to eat something like an elephant, to break it down, to chunk it down, and to learn how to prioritize things. So I've had the full spectrum of leaders, as probably you have, and managers who have managed me throughout my time. And I picked up things that I loved and didn't love from that. And I always like Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, a quote by Dee that says, think about what are the three worst things ever done to you by a manager or leader. So have a think about that for a moment, and hopefully you've got a pen and paper. So you might just want to jot those down for a moment, or even pop them in the chat box. What is sort of the three worst things that a manager or leader has ever done to you, or done in the environment that's had an impact on you? Okay, so maybe you've got some of those. And what are some of the best things that the best leaders or managers that you've had the opportunity to work with has, what have you experienced there? What's been great? I was explaining before a general manager who helped me chunk my tasks down and prioritize better. What are some of the things that great leaders and managers have done for you? And jot down two or three of those as well. And so, what Dee Hock from Visa said is a 60-second PhD in leadership and management is whatever all those things that were done to you that you didn't like, don't do that. And whatever it was that you loved, do that. That's your 60-second PhD in leadership and management. And so, Lisa, I love what you're sharing. So, worst dishonesty, manipulation, right? Oh, yeah, big, big things that are going to erode trust. And then the best was trusting and giving autonomy. And I think I'm an accredited facilitator in the 5 behaviors of effective teams. And in that, trust is the bedrock. It's the absolute supporting mechanism for everything. So I can totally understand why that is on your list, Lisa. Anyone else want to share a little of what are some of the worst things that you've experienced, or what are some of the best? Feel free to drop them in the chat box now. So I guess part of the reason that I'm here and I want to talk about this is throughout my work as a consultant working on culture in companies, I have started to see the erosion that's happening to humans, to their self-esteem. I see people in pain and suffering. I really believe organisations are possibly the most underutilised resource that we have for solving many human and economic and environmental challenges. And we are facing a lot of them, let's face it, in the world. We're facing so many. And I really believe that corporates and cultures and organizations can solve so many of these, but they kind of have to get out of their own way first. And while ever they're unhealthy and broken and dysfunctional, that's not going to happen. And we're often relying on charities and not-for-profits to do that work. And they just simply don't have the manpower, the financial power, and the pull power that a lot of corporates do to really make that difference. So for me personally, I'm on a bit of a mission to accelerate the evolution of a more conscious world. And I see myself doing that through the work I do with people and humans in leadership roles and their cultures. So that's kind of why I'm here today. And I'm just having a look at the chats quickly. Oh, Penny, inspire, stretch, and trust. I love that. Wow. Sounds like a great leader you've worked for there. Renee, not giving people opportunities, not providing information to do your job, not providing feedback. Right, yeah. So starving you basically. Um, oh, Kristen, yeah, the absence of a leader. And I've worked for one of those before that seemed to be off site all the time and meant all the big decisions got left to us in the office. No recognition, feedback, right? And it's what we crave as humans, isn't it? We crave feedback. We want to know, how am I going? So, what are some of the challenges you're facing right now in being a good manager yourself? Tell me a bit about what are some of the things. And I might unmute everyone for a moment, or you can unmute yourself if you've got a comment to say, and just maybe give us a few words about what are some of the challenges or things that you're facing. Who'd like to have a little chat? Oh, you're going to be shy on me, are you?
Hey
Apply.
Jay, it's Lisa. I'll jump in.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. What are some of the challenges you experience?
I think sometimes I find that I haven't actually had enough leadership training myself, and yet I'm expected to be a leader. And
Mm-hmm.
so there feels like sometimes there's a gap between what I know and what I should be doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And where do you feel you could have that training? Like, what are some of the gaps?
I think the gaps are in knowing how to manage up.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That's a challenging one.
Yep.
And actually accessing external people who have no understanding of our business is really valuable because they can come in with concepts, yet not have any bias on who we are. So I think it's very valuable to actually bring external trainers in to develop some part of that leadership.
Great. And where they don't have that kind of politicking, they don't need to play the game.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Renee's saying being able to really achieve, oh, hang on, my chat box just disappeared. Um, really achieve things in middle management, especially when communication from above is not as effective as it could be. Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else want to hop online and just chat to me for a moment, as in verbally? Be brave.
Hi Heidi, it's Liz.
G'day, Liz. How you doing?
Good. So I guess one of the big challenges that I've got to overcome is I come from a finance background
Hmm.
and I've been with the company for a long time. So I do have a good understanding of the processes and how things, ideally should work. But I've also taken on, the leadership of, 4 technical consultants who were previously managed by a technical manager.
Mm,
So I need to figure out how I can mentor them, and without being able to do that in the technical sense and still, have them respect me, even though I can't, help them with the technical part of the job, more of you know, a leadership role and how I can help them do their job.
brilliant. That's awesome, Liz. And, so many people face that. And I've worked with lots of people where the breadth of their role might become a general manager, say, and they're suddenly managing HR functions, finance functions, and technical, and their background might be like you in finance. And that's where learning great skills and expertise in management and in coaching people and developing people is what's most important. You don't need the technical expertise that they have, but you do need expertise as a manager. So you're spot on there. That's great. Thank you. Awesome. So, okay, so you've got the same issues as well, Joe. Okay, great. So, workplaces, I'm sure you'd agree, have been through extraordinary historical change, but the practice of management hasn't changed, right? It hasn't changed in over 30 years. So, a lot of the Management 101 courses are still teaching the same stuff that they taught 30 years ago. They're still using texts and books like Good to Great. And Jim Collins and work like that is fabulous historical stuff. And there's really great benefit in learning the history of organizations and things like that. But it doesn't necessarily function that well in today's modern environment. And most of those texts and a lot of the leadership practices and management practices that were developed in an industrial era when people came to work and punched in, did their work, punched out, and left, right? And so today we have social media, we have interactivity, we have a global workforce, we have such a different workplace environment. We have Gen Zs that are coming up that want fulfillment from their work, as we all do, right? And they're not just doing it necessarily for a paycheck, they're wanting rewards and recognition in a different way. And because of the way they're so mobile now, all of our workforces, they're more likely to leave if they're not getting what they're looking for, because they don't just need a job in their local town anymore. They could get a job anywhere, basically around the world. And so lots of things to do with how we've learnt to manage and what's been modeled for us are essentially broken. And what I'm seeing more and more, and what breaks my heart and also makes me quite angry, is toxic workplaces. And I spent 7 years of my career as a director of a Safe Work New South Wales. And during my time there, I saw this real shift and trend from where it used to be that workplace injuries when I first got there tended to be slips, trips and falls. It was tractor rollovers. It was a electrician getting electrocuted. It was a builder falling off a ladder. And so they tended to be more of those kind of physical injuries, which have terrible consequences and are, shocking and shouldn't happen. But what I saw over the years is, as WorkCover and Safe Work Australia and everyone got better, and so did employers at understanding their obligations and keeping people safe, the amount of those injuries really severely dropped off and reduced. However, psychosocial issues from bullying, harassment, depression, anxiety, stress, and overwork went through the roof. So there was this complete flip out, and all of these things that we hadn't seen so prevalent before just grew and grew and grew. And you can see here on the screen that a new report by Safe Work Australia has found that depression actually costs employers and companies here in Australia $8 billion a year. And we're seeing sick leave, an increased amount of sick leave due to those psychosocial issues, and 693 million of that is due to stress and bullying, which is just phenomenal and crazy and shouldn't be happening in our work tribes and families. And what this research also showed, that the most at-risk groups included workers that are in that younger period, in the earlier years of their career, 25 to 34, and they are displaying the poorest psychological health. And that, I think, is of a real concern, and is also something that we as managers, or if anyone's stepping into management for the first time or about to, really need to be thinking about, what's my responsibility as a manager and how can I create a healthy environment? So I really think we need to turn around this toxicity, and that, a bit like our globe and the way our actual planet is going, we're seeing water dry up. We're seeing the environment decaying and having problems in the same way we're seeing our workplaces replicate that. And so maintaining an effective culture today has become, I think, for businesses, the number one strategy. Without a healthy, vibrant, productive workforce, you don't get profits. You don't get a company that's moving forward. You don't get new ideas. So it's super critical that we start working on that. So let's have a chat in the chat box again for a moment. What does it feel like to work in a toxic workplace? And who, excuse me, who's had that experience? And if anyone wants to jump on the audio and actually speak to me as well, you're welcome to, or pop your ideas in the chat box. But has anyone ever worked in a toxic workplace, and what was that like?
I've had a toxic manager before who, he was such a perfectionist that he pushed it down so far that it just created inefficiencies, because I would, second guess myself every time And so I'd end up triple checking my work before sending it through when, I didn't need to change anything. I should have, but you were just so scared of getting some negative feedback because he was just that intense that it just, created
Right.
inefficiencies rather than actually improving any performance.
Yeah. So it was kind of crippling for you, Liz.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not nice, is it?
No, definitely not.
Yeah. I've worked for a micromanager myself, and I found the same thing. I was almost frightened to hand something in because it would get red penned. And she was dubbed the red pen Nazi, and it would come back with just like slashes through your work. It was quite, crushing. Excuse me. Penny's saying, yep, totally destructive. Yeah, and productively, you're right, just as Liz is saying, but also personally, right? It starts to erode your confidence and your abilities, and you're less likely to stretch and try things. So Lisa's also had a toxic manager. Okay, didn't realize gaslighting. Yeah, not only yourself, but other workmates. And yeah, a huge dent in your self-belief. And so I think some of the statistics are playing that out. That's what we're seeing in the data from WorkCover and WorkSafe, that people are bearing the impacts. And I don't always blame the managers. I don't know about you, but sometimes it could be that's what they had role modeled for them, right? And so they don't know any better, or maybe they don't know another way, or maybe they've been promoted to a job that they don't have the skill for, and they're frightened of being exposed. And so then they fall into this fear-based blame kind of behavior. Renee's saying, yeah, it's demoralizing when you're passionate about your job. Absolutely. And you feel like you don't have that breadth and ability to stretch and do what it is that you can do. What else is coming through? Sammy, getting pushed back into a box. Yeah. Not something that's ever been done before, off limits. Oh, yeah, right. I totally hear you. So don't have any creativity. Do as you're told, sit down, shut up, and be quiet, right? And you kind of go, well, what's the point of employing humans? If that's the case, get a robot to do it. So I think in some ways, all of you are touching on the fact that it's forgetting our humanity, and it's forgetting that we have these delicious humans who could be doing such juicy work for us, and instead we're frying them essentially. So on the other hand, what does it feel like to work in a healthy, vibrant team or environment? Has anyone ever worked in a really high performance team where things just worked and it gelled, and you had a manager or a leader that really was leading you there? So tell me a bit about what was that like? Has anyone ever had that joyous experience before? And feel free if you want to jump on and chat. Verbally, you can as well. Joe supported 100%. Yeah, right. Wanted to go to work every day and bring your best self, right? So you start wanting to bring your A game. And so that's building loyalty and trust again. If you say they supported you 100%, how did you know that, Joe? In what ways did you know you were being supported? I get that you felt it, but how did you know? Anyone else worked in a great team? So trusted, right, recognition of tasks and ability. Awesome. Okay, that's great. So it makes such a huge difference when you start being treated as a human and a valued, trusted employee or contributor to whatever the goals are. So I guess in all of this, what I want to boil it down to for tonight's call is the fact that management is actually an expertise, right? And so management is just like any other skill that we can learn. And masterful management means that we have mastered some of the expertise, and you can never completely master. We're always learning and growing. But when you think about it, expertise as a technical specialist is no guarantee of being an expert as a manager. And I think that's some of what you were kind of touching on, Liz, as far as you actually got to manage technical people, but also the reverse of this, where I see perhaps I work a lot with people in, say, in the medical field, and you might find a doctor who is a technical specialist or a nurse, and then they get promoted to being a director of a unit or a nurse unit manager, and they have no expertise as a manager. And so they're super great at the medical clinical side. They know how to handle an emergency or a patient, or, you know, what drugs to administer and why, but then they get thrown into a management or leadership role, and they suddenly have all these people and personalities and rosters and competing demands, and they don't know how to juggle that. And so we want to think about it as almost your second career. If you start becoming a manager, leader, or supervisor, it is like learning a second field. We shouldn't just assume that because someone's good at what they do, that they're going to be good at being a leader or a manager. So just like you've spent years becoming proficient at what it is your field of expertise is, you want to do the same thing and learn, practice, reflect, you know, make some errors, learn from those, get feedback, get some coaching or mentoring. Really, we want to keep doing that over and over and over before we can master management as well. And so for a lot of us, we think, oh, I've got 10 years experience or 20 years experience. Surely I'm good enough. But not if you haven't practiced, studied, looked at what does management mean? What does leadership mean? And had some guidance and some support and some role modeling around that. So what I believe is that in organizations, in order for cultures to really work and to be juicy, is that the middle out approach is critical. And so what often happens in organizations is this, right? We do the top down. The executive make all the decisions, the CEO, the general manager, the directors, or whatever that senior level of management is. They're making all the decisions and they're just pushing down to people, here's what to do, you know, meet this target, do this. And I see lots of people come in and want to do culture change programs or improve employee engagement. And because we've just seen those terrible statistics and the cost to our countries of what disengaged workforces are doing, we then say, right, so we want to get everyone engaged. And so then they think, great idea, let's do a bottom-up approach, right? And so they start doing interventions and things with the frontline. They start asking staff, what do you think about this? And what do you want in the kitchen? And that's when the foosball tables and the table tennis tables and the free coffees all start coming out of the woodwork. And they're the things that are proposed. But that's not actually going to change a culture, and it's not really going to give staff satisfaction, and it's not going to create an organization that hums. It might give them a lift, but it's not going to shift, right? And we want shift. We don't just want lift. So my approach is always to say, it's a middle out approach, because I'm a firm believer that middle managers are the culture carriers. They are the people who are doing the on the ground grunt work. They're the ones that are translating what comes from the executive and making it relevant and able to be consumed by the workforce at the front line. And they're the ones that are getting the feedback from the employees and seeing what's working, what's not, why are things maybe breaking down here, where is something could be improved, what kind of customer feedback are we getting and how could we tweak that. And so they're able to push that information and knowledge back up to the executive in order for strategic decisions to be made. And what happens so often is that if middle managers aren't trained and don't understand, I guess, the weight of that role and the I guess the real important role they play, then there can often be a real breakdown there. And often we punish our middle managers with too much work, right? We give them expert work to do, so specialist technical work, as well as the work of managing and leading people. And quite frankly, often that's too much for a human to handle, right? Because most people who move into a middle manager role after being an expert in something will often say to me, oh my gosh, like, I was really excited for the extra $10,000 a year or whatever it is, and the extra responsibility and the title and whatever came with it. But I didn't realize that 70 to 80% of my time would now be handling people issues, and often kind of, if I can say, schoolyard issues. So personality clashes, people got the poos with someone else. I don't like the way they're doing that. I'm not coming in today, right? And so often the middle managers are the ones that are then bearing the brunt of all of that. And they should be the channel. They're the conduit. They're the culture carriers. They should be the one who are translating from above and below and making sense of everything. So I really think they play a critical role. And that's why I really, when I'm working on companies with their culture, don't just focus on the executive, but say, let's look at how equipped are your middle managers for the role that they've been given. Feel free to comment in the chat box if you feel any of that as well, if you've noticed that. So I wanted to share this little chart here, and it's one that I've created, I guess, to start showing what's the value of mastery. What is it that mastery of a manager brings to an organization? And so if you have a look, excuse me for the froggy in my throat, if you have a look in the left-hand column in culture, so at the bottom, we have toxic cultures, right? And then they're unhealthy, then healthy, and then at the top and the, I guess, most desirable is that they're vibrant. And if you think about what are the managers that relate to those, so at what level? So at the bottom or the toxic level, we often find micromanagers, which is what I heard from many of you, where you couldn't even trust yourself to do something because you knew the manager was going to get in and get all detailed with it. In unhealthy cultures, we often find managers who are quite manic. And that's what I was talking about before, where they're that meat in the sandwich, they're feeling very pressured, and they start to display behaviors that really are quite manic because of the level of juggling they're doing. Maybe they're feeling out of depth, and it pushes them often into a fear or scarcity mindset. When we see healthy cultures, we start getting into a bit of maternalistic often, and that's for male or female. We can often see people where they start caring for their team incredibly. They might buy their team coffees, and they might be organizing, fun things for them to do. They're very caring. They don't like hearing any negative feedback from another team. They're more likely to go, that's not the case, and protect their little team, I guess, a bit like a mother hen. And while that's lovely, it can also push into unhealthy if we're not careful. If the manager starts taking on the burden of the team in a way that is too parental. And we don't want people to be playing parent-child games in the workplace. And too often, in most cultures that I see that have some issues, it's because parent-child's playing out. What we want is to start moving into adult space and being able to have difficult conversations, to have adult conversations, to disagree when we need to, and to be able to give feedback in a way that's not charged and loaded psychologically, which often parent-child kind of relationships are. And that's when we're able to move into mastery, that management mastery, where you are able to hold the space and have those conversations and to manage your people without that sense of wearing the burden of parenting them, but are able to actually see their potential and coach them to be their best. So the energy column, we often see in toxic environments and with those kind of micromanagers that the energy of the manager and the teams is flatlined. Really not much happening there. In fact, it can sometimes go backwards. And so we're starting to see the death of a team, the death of smiles, the death of productivity. That's when we start seeing a lot of absenteeism and presenteeism, which is even worse, I think, in lots of ways. In unhealthy cultures, usually you can pick those because there's loads of friction. So there's lots of bickering and fighting. There's lots of turf war and team wars. Whereas in healthy cultures, we start to see more focus, and in vibrant cultures, that's when we achieve flow. So this is where you start seeing super productive teams where they're achieving flow. So the productivity, you can see there, it's either stopped, it's slipping, or it's super, or it's sustainable. And that's ideally what we want. Often in healthy cultures where it's super focused, it can get a little competitive sometimes as well, and it can sometimes be a bit too much from a life-work balance perspective. We want to get to that sustainable zone where people are actually able to work at peak performance, but they're also able to take breaks or have the rest of the team cover for them when they need recovery. The feelings of how does it feel to actually be this manager or to be living and working in a team like this. So in toxic, usually, we've lost it, lost the plot. We want to leave. We literally can't understand why we're there. Maybe it's even starting to create issues at home. What I find with lots of people is when an environment's that toxic and down there, people start taking some of that grief that they're experiencing and the pain and anguish home with them. In unhealthy, we start to loathe it. We don't want to go to work. We start thinking, oh God, I've got to go to that meeting with those people, all of those sorts of things. Healthy, we like it. And then vibrant, of course, we love it. In the impact column, what I'm talking about here is what kind of impact can the manager have on the results of the team and the growth of the organization and what's actually happening. So down at the bottom, nothing, right? It's a stalemate. The company's neither growing, and sometimes it can even be dying. So that's why it's sort of less than zero. We tend to be going backwards there. We see shrinkage. We see good people leave the organization and unfortunately bad people stay. That's what happens a lot. Unhealthy cultures, it's just a 1-for-1. But when you start getting into healthy cultures, it's kind of, you start seeing 5 times the output and the impact. You start seeing 5 times the results you would get otherwise. And in vibrant cultures, literally 10 times the amount of impact. And you can see this in some, I guess, elite teams and things. If you think of some of the military and some of the really elite teams that are in military, you will often find those people would die for each other. They totally have each other's back. They do what we would call impossible missions, and yet they're able to achieve them because they are so vibrant in their culture. They're so close in understanding each other, their roles, their accountabilities, their responsibilities. And more than anything, they're able to have those fearless, frank conversations in a clean way without baggage when they need to. And some of the companies and cultures that are really moving towards that way, you might look at Netflix or Zappos, people like that. Here in Australia, Bird's Nest really have that kind of culture, and they start achieving exponential results. And it's how some of the companies that we see now are really growing and moving ahead of some of what used to be always heralded as the biggest companies in the world. We're starting to see some of these more nimble ones with really vibrant, healthy cultures moving ahead. And then right over on the other side, the type of culture they are. And I'll talk more about this in one of the other calls, but we move from a formal culture. When it's too formal and too rigid and there's no room for flexibility or for individuality, that's when we start feeling trapped, and that's when people start moving into those fear-based behaviors. In an unhealthy culture, people think that's unusual that I say it's focused, but actually the focus can be unhealthy because that's where you start seeing staff and people competing against one another. They become that focused, and I often think of real estate industry and industries like that where it is kind of dog eat dog and highly competitive. People are very focused. You often find that in government as well. And then we see healthy, and that's where it's starting to be that family maternal thing again, as I was saying, which can be healthy to an extent, but can also tip over into unhealthy quite quickly if it becomes too patriarchal, matriarchal. Ultimately, what we're looking for are freedom-based cultures where teams are empowered to actually start making decisions for themselves, and middle managers really clearly understand, how do I draw that performance out of people? So I'm really curious, because I'm no doubt this is the first time you've seen this graph that I've developed. I'd love you to think about, where is your team at and what level is your organization? So toxic being 1, vibrant being 4. Where do you see, if you look along that line, if you just pop in the chat box, what your team level is at? Are they down at level 1 toxic, or are they up at level 4? And where is your organization? So just put org and where you think your organization is. So I'll be quiet and take a sip of water for a moment while you guys pop that in the chat box where you think you are. So your team, Kristen, unhealthy, bordering toxic. Okay, cool. In some aspects. Yeah. Oh, and I just saw your question from before, Penny, about, in my opinion, can a healthy culture also be unproductive? Yes, most definitely. And that's what I was saying, when it starts becoming too much of a family culture, we can start doing more of the care, and I guess the care factor at the expense of the fact that we're a commercial profitable enterprise. So yeah, like we can't turn a corporate into a charity, but we can have a corporate with a big enough mission that's bigger than just financial gain to create a beautiful culture. But you can get too caught up on mothering. Yes. And I've seen that a lot. I've seen organizations where I would say they do a lot of kumbayaing. There's a lot of everyone has to agree and we all have to be consulted and all that sort of thing. And it just slows everything down and reduces productivity. So definitely. Lisa, team level 3, great. Organization level 2, sometimes a 3. Okay, yep. Team is vibrant and business is healthy. Awesome. That's great to hear, Penny. Team's healthy. Great, Sammy. Organization between 2 and 3. Thanks, Liz. My own direct team level 3, larger team and organization level 2. Organization unhealthy. Yeah, unhealthy. Right. Team unhealthy, probably close to toxic. Yep. Larger organization. Okay, so there's some challenges there within the specific team, Joe, that obviously sound like they need to be worked on and addressed. Okay, great. So I hope that's useful anyway, in starting to go, how do I get a bit of a litmus test on where am I at and where's my team at? Because as a manager, all of this really matters. And so if we're looking for sustainable success, oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks for your feedback. What we're wanting to look for is how many of our managers and what's the quality of them are average, good, or masterful. And if you look at kind of company growth and performance, what we get is, when we're moving more of the quality of our managers to good and masterful, we start seeing amazing company growth and performance. And this is where we move out of either toxic state or nanny state, and we start moving into high performance teams. So, and when you look at it, you don't need everyone to be masterful in that middle management and executive or leadership level. You just need about 40 to 60% at that masterful level, and 40 or 30% at the good level. Now, I've got still some at average, because you're never going to have everyone there. And that's not through any fault of anyone, but you could have new people that have just moved into management roles, right? And they need some coaching and training and mentoring and support to get there. And you're always going to have people with stuff going on in their life. And that can really very much impact on our performance and how we're behaving in the workplace. So you're never going to have it 100% perfect. And you're always going to have maybe deck chairs getting shuffled, people getting moved into other roles. And while they're learning the ropes, they can't necessarily be masterful and at peak performance all the time. But aiming, I guess, for that second half. So always looking for, how could we get 40 to 60% of our managers into that quality and that high performance area, because that's kind of where we get a tipping point, and where an organization starts increasing its profitability, it starts decreasing its injuries and work cover and claims, it starts decreasing its absenteeism and presenteeism. You start seeing greater staff satisfaction, more likely to start winning new jobs, win awards, and then can start attracting and retaining staff in a better way. So ideally, we want to start moving managers, because they are this critical linchpin, as I said, and they form the tipping point, because usually there's more middle managers than there are senior execs as well. And the senior leaders are just too far away from the front line to understand what's really happening out there with customers and on a day-to-day. So we really want to be moving a glut of our managers into that level. And so over the coming weeks, this is the model that I'm going to be pulling apart and exploring with all of you. And it's what I call my middle out model. So just as I was saying before, the organization needs to shift from the middle out. And so looking at developing middle managers and really supporting them. I also think the actual individual manager, the person who is moving into a leadership supervisory role, and that can be formal or informal, because we can be leaders and managers without title as well as with title, is really this middle out model. So most people I see and most performance development plans that I see for someone who's either a new manager or just, been one for a while, but looking at how they can further grow in development, is they go straight to the external stuff, the mastery stuff. They go straight to what courses can I go to? What books can I read? What can I learn? All of those sorts of things. Do I need to go and do a lean management program, or course? Do I need to go to the latest conference on leading and managing people? Do I need to go and do, a course in how to have difficult conversations? Do I need to be trained in the latest dashboard software so that I can manage the KPIs and KRAs, or whatever it is the organization's doing? And so often they go straight to that kind of level of mastery. And I think that's all upside down and round and round. For me, it's a middle out approach. What I see work best from a sustainable perspective, and when managers improve exponentially and over the long term and for their lifetime as a manager or leader in their career and in their life, is when it comes from the inside out. And so you must begin with mindset. Without having clarity of mindset and a good grounding in mindset, you can't possibly get to mastery. You're always just polishing the turd, to put it not so eloquently. And we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to wrap up something that's not quite there in glad wrap to make it shiny. We want to shine the diamond and smooth away the rough edges first before then we layer on things. And so this is the model that I'm going to be working through with you. It's called my middle out model. And so it works through mindset. So getting the right clean slate, applying the right practical techniques and things to make sure that you're in the best headspace possible. Then we move to minimalism. And we'll talk more about minimalism in another whole series in future. And really that's about stripping away everything that doesn't matter, cutting out the crap and focusing on what's most important. And then we can get to mastery. And this is where we start making fine-tuning 10-degree shifts, tiny little tweaks that really start polishing something from just being great to being bloody amazing, right? And that's ultimately where we want to get to. But we can't do that without coming back to the raw cut stone of you first. And so here it is again, but with a little more detail. And how it works is kind of thinking about, and I use the word frequency, which some people think is a bit woo-woo, but really it's just about what's my vibration, where am I at, how am I kind of being. So if you think about on level 1, the lower frequency of mindset is doubt. So when I'm in self-doubt, I start doubting myself. Some of you have had managers you all mentioned as well before that made you feel that way, that made you second guess your work, that made you want to go over it again and again and all those sorts of things. And so that creation of self-doubt. Now, so many of us, and particularly for anyone who is here in Australia, I know there are other people who have registered that are international as well, but for those in Australia, I do think we have quite a confidence epidemic here, a bit of a confidence crisis. I see so much self-doubt in workplaces. I see people suffering under their lack of self-worth. And we have that bit of tall poppy syndrome, ex-convicts that seem to keep us down. But self-doubt really will infiltrate your whole team. And it doesn't allow them to build trust and confidence in you. So doubt is something we really have to start working on. And so the higher frequency of mindset is surrender. And this means when we're in a place where we're in total acceptance of ourselves. You know, that I love, appreciate, and can accept myself and my skills, that I'm working on myself, I'm doing my absolute best, and then I'm able to just surrender that I'm not attached to being perfect. And I think, Liz, you were the one that talked about someone who had perfectionism before. You know, that's not healthy either. So we don't want to go from ego less to ego full. We want to go to a place of where I am enough and I accept that, and then I surrender. Minimalism, we can see the lower frequency there is indecision, and I'll go through these more in another call, but indecision is the lower, and then having intentionality and choosing wisely about where we spend our time, energy, money, breath in what we do. And then mastery is the lower frequency, is about self-focus. And that sounds interesting because we're talking a lot about sharpening the saw and polishing your diamond. But self-focus too much can really hamper your growth. And so we want to have a service focus. We want to start thinking about, how do I turn it out from being I or me into we and us? And so that's kind of what we'll be moving through and working through over the coming weeks, particularly beginning with mindset. So here's the mindset model, and this is where we want to begin. And I want you to all think about for a moment, just what do you believe about mindset? And what is it about mindset that you believe is important in managing and leading people and teams? So if anyone wants to jump online live or pop something in the chat box, I'm more than happy to chat either way with you. Why do you think mindset is so super critical when it comes to leading people and teams and cultures? And there's no right or wrong. It's just your own impressions and experiences.
Okay. So I think that mindset's really important because it's if you believe that you, or whatever the saying is about, like if you think you can or think you can't, you're right either way.
Yes.
So you need to be going into tasks and you need to be going into, setting objectives, believing that you will achieve them, because otherwise you're sort of betting against yourself and you'll never succeed. So that's where it starts. And if you've got to be that within yourself, so that then you can be that for your team and help develop those kind of skills and capability in your team.
Love it. Perfect. I should have typed as you wrote, Kristen. Love it. Yeah, I love your perspective. Anyone else want to jump in, or I'm seeing some people writing here, so let me just quickly have a look at some of those. Thanks for your comment on the table, Renee. Yeah, teams are like children. Yes. They know when something or someone isn't right. Absolutely, right? We're all energetic beings, and we all are like little children running around, and we all know how in tune children are, right? They can pick up on everything. So you're spot on there. Lisa saying mindset is at the core of all decisions we make. Yes, it's like the rudder that steers the ship. Yeah. And even mindset around what are your values, and knowing what are those attributes and values that I hold dear to me, and do I have enough of a clean mindset that I'm able to hold those close to me, and that I can maintain the standards and values that I believe in. And Joe's saying being positive, yeah, being a role model. So all of those things, everything that everyone has just said so eloquently. And so, yeah, it really is mind over matter. And this is one of those, those statistics where they say 72% of statistics in the world are made up. This is one of those, and it's kind of my lick my finger, stick it in the air litmus of what I observe from working with hundreds of managers, across all sorts of industries, is that it's that Pareto principle of the 80-20 rule. 80% of a manager's success comes from having the right mindset in place. And anyone that I'm brought in to coach or support, it's always where I need to go first with them, because without that base and foundation, they're really going to struggle to layer or add any other knowledge on top of it. Okay, so middle out is key. That growth mindset is the belief that you're in control of your own destiny. Knowing that I'm in control of my ability, I can learn and improve. I actually have control of that, right? And yes, it's still hard work and effort, but if you don't have that, I guess, affirming belief that you're in control, then all of it becomes too hard and you'll never make a step forward. So we really want to start thinking about, how can I nurture a growth mindset first? Because our mind is super, super powerful. And, what we think about, we bring about. What we think, therefore, we are. We create everything through our mindset. And I have a little saying that I often think to myself, which is idealize, visualize, verbalize, materialize. So idealize is you have to have the idea first, right? And the idea comes from your mindset before you can verbalize it and share it with someone else, before you can visualize what that looks like, before you can materialize it. So really, I want you to think for a moment, and this is just for your own thoughts. We don't need to share it, and I'm conscious of the time, but the power of the mind, thinking about what are the mindsets from your past that don't serve you anymore. And I really encourage you to spend some time after the call doing this as a bit of like homework or practice for yourself. So literally maybe getting a piece of paper and drawing a line down the middle and having the plus sign on one side and the minus side on the other, and going, what are some of the mindsets that no longer serve me? And just writing down, is it the I'm not good enough? Is it the I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too bossy, I'm too shy, I'm, too whatever to be a good manager and leader? And I know I went through that a lot, especially in my 20s when I was about 26 and 28, and had moved into management roles. And all the other people in the executive and the teams around me were all middle-aged males, much older than me, much more experienced. And I constantly thought of myself as the new uni grad, which I wasn't and hadn't been for quite some time. Yes, I was more of the younger, less experienced on the team, but I also still had things to contribute. And so it was actually a mindset I had to overcome, because it really held me back. It meant I didn't speak up in board meetings and things like that initially, because I felt like, what could I possibly have to contribute? And it's all that thing about, I don't want to look silly, or, I don't own the space that I'm sitting in here. And so think about, what are some of the mindsets from your past that don't serve you? And I'd encourage you to write a bit of a list of them. And then on the other side, in the positive column, I want you to, for homework, to think about, what new mindsets do you think you need in order to further develop your mastery of management and leadership? And how might you learn these? Where or who or how might you go about? What practices might you introduce into your own life and your work in order to kind of polish this? So 2 columns. What are some that you want to let go of, and what are some that you want to encourage? So that's it for tonight, and we're right on the hour. So to finish up, in summary, I wanted to give you more of a picture tonight about why middle management and learning management skills, and then being able to use them as we move into senior management or owning our own company or whatever it might be, are so super critical and are often forgotten and left out. And they really are the key to success. In the next session and the next call, I'm really going to keep working on this mindset, but we're actually going to unpack mindset and what it actually means. And we're going to start looking at, what are some of the strategies for actually shifting them. And so you'll have lots of practical things from that session that you can go away with to start moving through. How can I start shifting my own mindset? How can I start letting go of some of those limiting beliefs that maybe you've just identified? And what habits and practices and ways of thinking could I start introducing in order to shift myself forward? So that's it for this evening. Thanks for your comment there, Tracy. I'm glad you enjoyed and got some thoughts there. If you're interested in finding out more in the meantime, I do have a half-day team mastery workshop that I run with lots of managers to support them around how they can build a healthier, more vibrant team. And also, I do a little series of Masterful Manager coaching, which includes 3 coaching sessions with managers who are looking for some support and some of that independent external eye and support over what they do. And of course, depending on your organization, you can always contact me to find out more about those. We can email out more next time with information and links for those. But thank you all. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for your involvement and your chatting. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed the provocation there, Penny. I hope to see many of you all next session. And if you like, I can also send out the presentation. Is that something that people would like to receive? If you can just pop a yep. Okay, Joe, great. All right. What we might do is send out my presentation as well so that people, if you want to reflect on it later, you can check that out. The recording will also be available, but the slides might be useful for you, particularly if you're wanting to have a chat to someone else or even re-look over that diagram and scale in when you're thinking about your teams. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. I look forward to chatting to many of you or all of you on the next session. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.